So a little bit about me. I am an accountant by trade and experience, and opened Byrd's Filling Station, which is a refill store, a little over a year ago. I was trained as a climate reality project leader by Al Gore, actually in the first ever virtual presentation that they did this summer. It was scheduled for Las Vegas in March, and due to the pandemic, it was canceled, but the organization was able to pivot and provide it online. That ended up allowing 10,000 people from all over the world to attend. And while there were small groups that were primarily based on our location, it was really impressive to see the amount of time and energy that were being expended by people all over the world to address the climate crisis. Some of the slides that you'll see in this upcoming presentation are adapted from the Climate Reality Project work, and some are going to dive a little more specifically into plastics than that overview did. So with that, let's dive right in. This is the first picture of Earth fully illuminated that any of us ever saw. It was taken on the last of the Apollo missions, and it really changed the way that humanity thought about our common home. It reminds us that we're all connected and that our actions have an impact on our planet. There are really only three questions remaining about the climate crisis. Must we change, can we change, and will we change? First of all, must we change? The scientific community all around the world has been telling us for a long time that yes, we must change. And now, especially if you're here in San Mateo County, Mother Nature is really telling us that we have to change. The sky is not a vast and limitless expanse the way it appears as we stand on the ground and look up. In reality, we've got this thin shell of atmosphere surrounding the planet. And we are kind of using it like an open sewer. We're spewing 152 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into this thin shell of atmosphere every day. And this pollution, especially carbon dioxide, is building up and trapping heat. So let's go through a little of the basics of global warming. It's been understood by scientists since the 1800s. Energy comes from the sun in the form of light. The energy is absorbed by the earth and warms it. Some of that energy is radiated away from the earth in the form of heat, and some stays trapped in the atmosphere, which is a good thing. It's kept the planet at a stable temperature. Now, however, we're thickening the atmosphere by filling it with this heat-trapping pollution. More heat energy is trapped, and it's warming our planet at an unprecedented rate. There are many sources of human-caused global warming pollution, from agriculture and forest burning to transportation, many other factors. The main source and cause are the burning of fossil fuels, and today we're going to focus in on oil production and the industrial processes which go together to create plastics. Now, we in California are no strangers to the impact of climate change. You know, everything from the heat wave that we saw last week to this is the fire that burned last fall. Now we know we've got over 1 million acres in California burning right now, to sea level rise. I like to pause on this one because I didn't realize until recently that San Mateo was in the top 10 US cities at risk from sea level rise. We have almost 11,000 homes in the risk zone, which represents nearly 42% of our housing. And these houses at risk collectively value $14.6 billion. Warmer temperatures also have an impact on the spread of tropical diseases. Modern transportation and air travel do play a part, but the potential range for many diseases expands as the regions farther and farther poleward get warmer. So all of these threats, including many that we haven't even covered here, and the fact that the World Economic Forum says that climate change is the #1 threat to the global economy, can help us answer the question, must we change? And the answer is obviously yes. So I promised to talk about how plastics fit into this puzzle. Typically, we consider plastics to be a pollution issue, and that definitely is the case, and it's a problem, but that's the final, most visible problem, and not the first one. The problem starts way before we get to the point of this picture. Why is that? It's because 99% of plastics are made from fossil fuels. A lot of the oil companies are now realizing that their market for electricity generation is being threatened by renewable energy, by electric vehicles, and so they're looking to petrochemicals as the growth sector. And most of that, 75%, is made up of plastic. If we look at what we have produced on a global level in terms of plastics, we can see that it's pretty much an exponential curve here. And if we look at the weight of plastic that's predicted to be made and even littered into the ocean in the next 30 years, Scientists are predicting that the weight of the plastics in the ocean will be more than the weight of all the fish. We can't allow that to happen either, but we're seeing this huge increase in plastic production. Since 2010, companies have invested more than $200 billion in 333 plastic and other chemical projects in the US alone. This includes expansions of existing facilities, new plants, associated infrastructure like pipelines. All this is coming from the American Chemistry Council, an industry body. Global plastic production is expected to double in the next 20 years and quadruple in the next 40. And when we have increased plastic production, we see increased plastic emissions. We'll come back to this slide in a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about these emissions. The production of plastics puts out as much air pollution and CO2 as 189 coal-fired power plants. And they want to build more plastics facilities, and we can expect the increase in production to result in up to 300 coal-fired power plant equivalents by the year 2030. Air pollution damages the hearts and brains of people living in polluted cities. And these particulates have been found in children as young as 3, and it's causing all sorts of problems. In fact, it also causes mental health problems and a decline in cognitive ability. What parent, knowing that, wouldn't want to be part of the effort to change? Now, let me give you a couple examples that can kind of bring to life the connection between air pollution and health problems. We see the sulfur dioxide emissions in Louisville, Kentucky from the burning of coal here in red. The dotted line in 2015 marks the point at which the coal plants were retrofitted and some were retired. So let's look at the hospital visits. You can see it goes up and down in tandem. I'll show you another example. This one goes back a few years, but it's a really vivid example from Salt Lake City. So we're looking at hospital admissions for bronchitis and asthma in 85 to 86. Now they've got a big steel mill in this valley. It's kind of an inversion dome in Salt Lake Valley. And the steel mill was shut down. Well, when it was shut down for retrofitting and repairs, look at what happened to the hospital admissions for bronchitis and asthma. And when they finished the repairs and renewal, they reopened the steel mill and hospital admissions went right back up again. And the same exact thing happened with pneumonia and pleurisy. So it went down when the steel mill was closed, and then when the steel mill started polluting again, hospital admissions went right back up as people started breathing the pollution again. Again, there's a very clear connection here, and it causes a lot of problems. We don't often think of pollution as being connected to type 2 diabetes, for example, but 150,000 cases each year in the United States relate to this particulate air pollution. Well, now let's look at the vulnerability of air pollution from all kinds of sources, not just the burning of fossil fuels, but also like chemical cracker plants, like the ones in Cancer Alley. So cracker plants are called cracker plants because they crack the fossil fuels into the chemicals and resins that are used to make plastic. The highest concentration of cracker plants in the US is in a place called Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is nicknamed Cancer Alley. 7 out of the 10 census tracts in the US with the highest rates of cancer are located here. And 8 of the 10 parishes with the highest death rates from COVID-19 are also here. Now they're proposing to build even more plastics and chemical plants here. And it's almost like somebody called it's a sacrifice zone. You know, one of the reasons communities of color are so much more likely to be downwind of these smokestacks and more vulnerable in other ways is that they've been deprived of having as much political and economic power to defend themselves against the location of these toxic producers and these facilities. And that's just not right. Some of these plants have been in violation for EPA regulations for over a decade. Even before COVID-19, the percentage of African-American children suffering from asthma is more than twice that of white children, and the death rate for African-American children from asthma is 10 times higher than the death rate from asthma for white children. It's horrible, and it causes us to really look at our surroundings and wonder how some of us could have been so oblivious to this, but it also highlights how important it is to build back after this pandemic cloud lifts. And building back as we begin these national and global plans to solve the climate crisis really means putting environmental justice concern right at the heart of these recovery plans. And also creating a just transition for those who are more likely to suffer economically, like coal miners and the people who are working in these plastic plants. Air pollution can also cause high blood pressure in the children born to mothers who were breathing the air pollution when they were pregnant. So we've got to address this for all kinds of reasons. Overall, African Americans are three times as likely to die from air pollution than the overall population. And if we'd been paying attention, we would have seen that it's not just the communities of color. If we'd paid more attention to the unequal tragedies that have been suffered by these communities of color, we might have been quicker to address the fact that 40% of the people in the US of all groups live in areas that don't meet EPA clean air standards. Now, the US is not the most air polluted country in the world. We already know it's bad enough here, but look at China and Russia and goodness, India. Fracking has been linked not only to air pollution, but also water pollution and earthquakes, mainly when they re-inject the wastewater that's used in the fracking process. And the leakage from fracking of methane and the leakage of methane from gas pipelines. Natural gas is methane. Natural gas is a branding label from a long time ago, but it is 99% methane, and the leakage is actually higher than 60% higher than what was previously estimated. And that's really important, and this is actually a counterpoint that I use when people argue that plastics are stable and they don't release carbon emissions. There are obviously still the emissions from the extraction of the fossil fuels, and then they do off-gas slowly. When you look at the causes of the climate crisis over a 20-year time frame, each molecule of methane is 86 times as powerful as each molecule of CO2. And over longer time frames, it's a very large multiple in the damage that it does as far as a greenhouse gas. So, do we have to change? Yes, we do. But what about the second question? Can we change? The answer to this question is very exciting and very positive for many sectors. Plastics need a little bit more attention, and I'll show you why. To understand this, we need to understand why we're seeing this growth in plastics. And in order to look at this, let's look at some of the other sectors first, other renewable sectors. Wind energy, for example, in the year 2000 was projected to provide 30 gigawatts of electricity by 2010. By 2019, we exceeded that by 22 times over. And growth in wind energy is on an exponential curve. Globally, wind could supply worldwide electricity consumption 40 times over. Solar is a similar story. 18 years ago, the best projection we had was that we'd get 1 gigawatt of solar energy capacity by 2010. We blew that out of the water by 17%. And by 2019, we had exceeded the goal by 121 times. We're seeing a large uptick, dramatic uptick in the solar installations throughout the world. And as we see the increase in installations, the cost of these solar modules is coming down. 2/3 of the world right now is seeing renewable energy cheaper than coal, and it's projected that it'll be cheaper in 100% of the world in about 5 years. This is allowing places that didn't have access to great grids or access to electricity to leapfrog some of the older technologies that we've been using. But let's talk about Chile, because Chile is a great example because of some of their policies. The country's solar market took off slowly, but look at what's happening now. The end of 2018, Chile had 2.3 gigawatts of installed solar, and now they have an additional 16.67 gigawatts of solar projects either approved or under construction. And there are many regions in the world where this type of growth and development are possible. That is just staggering to me. Every hour, the Earth gets as much energy from the sun as we need to run the entire global economy for a year. So if we can just increase the fraction of this energy that we harvest and use, we can make a lot of progress towards solving the climate crisis and helping local economies at the same time. Now, battery storage is an essential part of the green energy revolution as well. Batteries allow us to store excess solar, wind, and use it during those times when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. Batteries are also critical for the electric vehicle market. A lot of people are talking about them as microgrids for when we have rolling blackouts. In 2016, the cumulative storage globally approached 3 gigawatts, which is almost twice what it was 5 years earlier. And as storage technologies get more efficient and as they get cheaper, the market's growing really quickly. Global cumulative storage is expected to reach over 900 gigawatts in 2040. We're seeing some of this in San Mateo with the rolling blackouts last week. And one of the downsides of California leading on renewable energy is that we're also learning what to do and what not to do about storage. LED lights are another great example of can we change. They are taking over a significant chunk of the market and expected to take over almost 100% within 5 years. And auto manufacturers. Here's a list of all the auto manufacturers that now have at least one electric model in production right now. So while all of this sounds like really great news for renewables, it's bad news for the bottom line of the big oil and gas companies. And this is leading to major players realizing that we have a surplus of oil. All these carbon fuels reserves that we've depended on for 80% of the world's energy, the vast majority of those are now considered unburnable. Technically they could be burned, but they shouldn't be burned if we have any chance of keeping global warming under the 2°C threshold. So now what we're seeing is a subprime carbon bubble. And this actually is reminiscent of the subprime mortgage crisis that triggered the economic collapse in 2007 and 2008. They had these mortgages that were being given to millions of people who couldn't make a down payment, couldn't make monthly payments, and it was just a matter of time before it collapsed. So we've got something similar happening with fossil fuels right now. So here are all the fossil fuels burned over the last 170 years. And if we look at the fossil fuels burned over the last 20, it's a significant chunk of that. Now, here are all of the fossil fuel reserves that have been discovered, proven out, marked on the books of the companies who own them. And here is the amount that scientists say we could burn and still give us a fair chance at keeping temperature increases below 2°C. So what about the rest of it? Those are considered subprime unburnable. Carbon reserves is a big threat to the global economy. And already in the marketplace, investors are looking at undeveloped crude reserves as a risk to the companies that own them. We're seeing that they're just not as good investments. So we look at the S&P 500 returns over the last 10 years. And if we compare that to the energy sector, energy has been the worst performer since the US bull stock market began a decade ago. If you look at stock market returns, they have gone up 60% in the last 3.5 years for renewables. They've actually gone down 12% in fossil fuel companies. Exxon's return on invested capital are going down, as is their market capitalization. So here is what Exxon's market cap has done over the last 3 years. And when we compare that to something like Tesla producing the electric cars, I wish I actually had this graph updated for the last couple of weeks since Tesla's stock price has gone through the roof. But companies are really coming to understand that they're facing a real crisis. Just 1 year ago, the head of strategy for BP said a lot of their reserves will never see the light of day. And lo and behold, this year we've had a lot of write-downs from a lot of fossil fuel companies. There's a major change underway, and one of the favorite parts that I had of listening to former Vice President Gore speak was that he said this reminded him of one of the oil ministers in Saudi Arabia and what he said to the king of Saudi Arabia. He said, "Sir, remember the Stone Age didn't end because of a shortage of stones. It ended because something better came along." Well, something better has come along, better than a fossil fuel. But do you think companies are just going to give up and say, we're not going to burn all of these? No, they'll pivot. They'll use it for something else. And right now it looks like they're pivoting to plastics. So let's revisit this slide again. This is the expectation for plastic production in the next 30 years. And these plastics bring along with them all the air pollution that we just talked about. And we need to focus on reducing them, not allowing them to increase. So this increase or decrease, should we be able to affect that change, won't happen in a bubble. And by understanding the context of these situations, we can be well prepared to prevent it. One way for the United States is to slow down subsidies. We provide taxpayer subsidies for fossil fuels that are 24 times higher than what we provide for renewables. We've got to stop forcing taxpayers to subsidize the destruction of human civilization. It's pretty ridiculous. Yes, these companies have a lot of political power, a lot of lobbying power, but we need to activate people to fight back against this because we're at a turning point. We actually have had some clarification in the last week that one of the candidates for president would actually seek to get rid of these $649 billion in taxpayers in fossil fuel subsidies within the first year of his presidency. I think it kind of goes without saying which one that is, but it highlights why this election is really crucial for the environment. So looking around at all of that, looking around at what change has been happening, you know, we've seen the tremendous change in the renewable sectors. We've seen tremendous change that came out of pandemic response plans. So can we change? Yes, we can bring all of this experience to bear so that plastics don't simply replace the emissions and pollutions from fossil fuels. We just need to know how. So that brings us to the third question. Third question being, will we change? And here too, we've got some exciting news. The first is that in December of 2015 at the Paris climate negotiations, every nation in the world agreed to phase down greenhouse gas pollution to net zero as early as the second half of this century. Climate action just isn't about what countries do. We all have to take the lead. We're seeing corporations, states, provinces, cities, even individuals really trying to take that next step to reduce emissions. And some more good news here, the US cannot legally withdraw from the Paris Accord until one day after the US presidential election. So while our current president has signaled that he does intend to do that, should Biden win this election and choose to keep us in the Paris Agreement, it would simply take one letter that says we're committed to the ideals of the Paris Agreement, and the US would be right back in. We are also seeing marches and demonstrations and demands at the ballot box for the change necessary to solve the crisis. Recycling. So now we're going to go more from the systemic discussion of this to what can individuals do. You know, a lot of us think, okay, we go to the store and we buy our dish soap and we buy all of our personal care items and they're in plastic, and so that's okay because I'm going to put it in my blue bin. But I want to talk for a little bit about why recycling is not exactly the system that we hope that it could be. The debris that you see falling in this video, in the background of this video, is actually stuff that was placed in the blue bin and is destined for the landfill. This is our San Carlos sorting center. This video was taken in pre-COVID times when they were offering public tours. And our blue bin recycling goes through and it gets sorted out by optical scanners and all sorts of different machines, and it does get hand sorted by people at a number of different steps. But there just is a significant chunk of what goes in there that is not really recyclable at all and ends up coming back through this feed and back straight into our landfill. The other thing that a lot of people don't necessarily understand about recycling is how difficult recycling is for plastic. So while glass and aluminum and steel can be infinitely recycled without losing any of the qualities that make them a great choice for packaging, plastic cannot. Only about 9% of the plastic that has ever been made has been recycled, which is a significant number. That means it is not recycled. Now, there are a number of reasons for this. Some is that some plastic is not recyclable at all. It is a film. It doesn't have a number with the little resins on it, so we can identify the melting points and the characteristics and how to break that plastic down. Some of it ends up as litter. Some of it is contaminated or mixed with multiple types of plastic, which can't be recycled at all. Plastic actually can only be recycled 1 to 2 times before it starts to lose those characteristics that were desirable in the first place. So even after it's recycled once or twice, that is when it's destined for the landfill. And not to mention, all of this kind of got capped off at the end of 2018 with China's national sword policy when they stopped importing a lot of our recycling. So while this 9% number for plastics was a great number, I have not been able to find a reliable number, but I would bet a lot of money that this number is going down over the last year or so. So what can we do? One of the easiest things for an individual to do, which you can start doing immediately, is to reduce. There are 3 big questions that I ask myself every time I go to the store or when I'm buying a product, and it's really helped to reduce the waste that we have in our house and the plastic. And those 3 questions are, number 1, do I really need this? Number 2, if the answer is yes, I need this, is there a way to buy it without plastic or with less packaging? And if the answer is no, there's not a way to buy it plastic free, then could you buy in bulk to eliminate some of the plastic packaging as well? Another thing that you could do as an individual, vote with your wallet. So choose the plastic-free options. You know, if you're looking at not to call anybody out, but if you're looking at a Coke bottle and one's in plastic and one's in glass, take that option. Tell the corporations why you're buying or not buying a specific product. I'd be remiss as a refill store owner if I didn't say support your local refill stores. The UK is kind of leaps and bounds above where the US is right now, but there are a handful of refill stores that are popping up, and the more support that these see, the more successful they will be and the more options there will be on the marketplace. Other ways you can make your voices heard, again, specific to where we are. In California this week, there is a vote coming up on a Circular Economy and Plastic Pollution Act. This would do a lot of great things. It would require a 75% reduction in single-use plastics by 2032. It would put the onus on producers to make sure that their plastics are recyclable or compostable. So write to your assembly members, write to your state senators. There's also a federal House bill that was initiated in February of this year, which currently has 79 co-sponsors. It would do some of the things that the California bill would do, but it would also standardize recycling and composting labels. It would prevent plastic waste from being shipped to developing countries that can't manage it. It would also temporarily pause new plastics facilities. There are a lot of things that that can be done, and we need to make sure that our elected officials are hearing our voices on this one. And finally, if you're in a position and are able, donate to the causes that stand up to big oil. This can be anything from the NRDC to the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF, to grassroots organizations like Rise St. James that are based in Cancer Alley and are fighting against more cracker plants being built in their backyards. So please join those who are speaking out and voting and making everyday choices to fight the climate crisis. Use your voice and your vote and your choices in the marketplace and in your life. Let's all speak truth to power like our world depends on it, because our world does depend on it.